test 3 disturbing true-fake cop horror stories. 1. The red lights. It was a stormy night when Jenna decided to leave work late. She had been buried under a mountain of paperwork, trying to catch up on deadlines. By the time she left the office, it was well past midnight, and the rain was coming down in sheets. The roads were slick and visibility was low. Jenna just wanted to get home. She drove cautiously, her knuckles white as she gripped the steering wheel. The only sound was the constant thrum of rain against the windshield. She was about halfway home when she noticed flashing red and blue lights in her rearview mirror. Her heart sank. She hadn't been speeding, and her car was in perfect condition. Still, the lights were unmistakable. With a sigh, Jenna pulled over to the side of the road. The rain had turned into a torrential downpour, and she could barely see the police car that had pulled up behind her. A figure emerged from the vehicle, wearing a dark raincoat and a wide-brimmed hat. Jenna rolled down her window just enough to speak. "Is there a problem, officer?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. The man didn't respond immediately. He walked closer, his face obscured by shadows. The way he moved set off alarm bells in Jenna's mind, but she tried to push her fear aside. After all, this was a police officer. "You were driving erratically," he finally said, his voice deep and cold. "I need you to step out of the vehicle." Jenna hesitated. Something wasn't right. The way he spoke, the way he moved, it all felt wrong. But what could she do? He was a cop. "I really don't think that's necessary," she stammered, hoping to buy some time. The man leaned closer to the window. Jenna could now see his face, or what little of it was visible. His eyes were dark and devoid of any warmth, and his smile was chilling. "Get out of the car," he repeated, more forcefully this time. Jenna's heart pounded in her chest. She reached for her phone, intending to call 911, but the man noticed. "Don't," he warned, his voice taking on an edge of menace. In a split-second decision, Jenna slammed her foot on the gas, her tires screeching against the wet pavement. She sped away, her hands shaking and her vision blurred by tears. She didn't stop until she reached the safety of her driveway, where she immediately called the police. When they arrived, they told her the most chilling part of all: no patrol cars had been in the area that night. Whoever had pulled her over wasn't a cop. 2. The midnight knock. Tom was always a night owl, preferring the quiet solitude of the late hours. It was around 2 a.m. when he heard a knock on his door. His first thought was that it might be one of his neighbors, but when he looked through the peephole, he saw a man in a police uniform standing on his porch. "Police," the man called out, his voice muffled by the door. "Can you open up? I need to speak with you." Tom's stomach dropped. He hadn't done anything wrong, but the unexpected visit unnerved him. He hesitated before opening the door slightly, leaving the chain lock in place. "Is there a problem, officer?" Tom asked cautiously. The man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "We've had reports of a disturbance in the area. I just need to ask you a few questions." Tom's mind raced. A disturbance? He hadn't heard anything. Something felt off, but the uniform was convincing, and the man's demeanor was calm. Still, Tom's instincts screamed at him to be careful. "I'm sorry, officer," Tom said, trying to sound respectful, "but it's late, and I don't think I've done anything wrong. Could I see your badge, please?" The man's smile faltered for a brief moment, but he quickly recovered. "Of course." He reached into his pocket, but instead of a badge, Tom saw the glint of a knife. Without thinking, Tom slammed the door shut and locked it. He backed away, his heart racing, as the man began pounding on the door, shouting obscenities. Tom grabbed his phone and dialed 911, his hands shaking. The operator assured him that help was on the way, but every second felt like an eternity. The man outside continued to pound on the door, but the sound of approaching sirens finally made him flee. When the real police arrived, they searched the area but found no sign of the imposter. They told Tom he was lucky. Others in the neighborhood hadn't been so fortunate. The late shift. Katie worked the late shift at a local diner, the kind that stayed open 24 hours for truckers and night owls. It was usually quiet around 3 a.m. with only a few regulars sipping coffee in the dimly lit booths. One night, a man in a police uniform walked in. He seemed out of place, but Katie greeted him with a smile, assuming he was just grabbing a late-night meal. "Evening, officer," she said. "Can I get you something?" The man didn't respond right away. He scanned the diner with a cold, calculating gaze before finally turning to Katie. "I'm here on official business," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. Katie's smile faltered. "Oh, I see. Is there something wrong?" "Yes," he replied, his eyes narrowing. "There's been a report of a suspect matching your description in the area. I need you to come with me for questioning." Katie's heart skipped a beat. She had no reason to be a suspect for anything. She glanced around the diner, hoping one of the regulars would step in, but they seemed just as startled as she was. "Are you sure?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. The man's expression hardened. "Don't make this difficult." Katie's mind raced. Something about this didn't feel right. She thought about the recent news stories she'd heard about people impersonating officers to lure victims away. "I think I'd feel more comfortable if we did this here," she said, trying to stall. The man's eyes darkened with anger. He stepped closer, leaning over the counter. "You're making a mistake," he hissed. Before Katie could respond, one of the regulars, an older trucker named Bill, stood up. "Hey, if you're a cop, show us some ID," he demanded. The man glared at Bill, but instead of reaching for his ID, he turned and walked out of the diner without another word. Katie's legs felt like jelly as she watched him leave. Bill called the real police, and when they arrived, they told her she'd made the right call. The man was no cop, just another predator using a uniform to hide his true intentions. These stories remind us of the importance of vigilance. In the dead of night, when we're most vulnerable, even those who are supposed to protect us might not be who they seem. Always trust your instincts and remember that not every uniform comes